3 books every musician should read. For the past 4 years, I've been posting a list of the books I read just to share it with anyone who follows me and is curious as to what I read. I really do enjoy reading, and it is a habit that I feel makes me a considerably more interesting person. So in this video, I'm going to go through the entire list of books I read this year. There were 44 books I finished, but I wanted to preface this list with 3 books that I feel every musician would benefit from reading. Now, I titled this video 3 books every musician should read, and I'm fully aware that should is a very strong word. I'm somebody who does not like to be told what I should do, so I consider this not to be advice, but it's simply a video of me sharing some information that I've found to be incredibly valuable. If you would like me to share more of this kind of content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and do ring the bell if you'd like a notification when I post new videos. The first book I would highly recommend musicians read is Peak by Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. This is the best book on expert performance I've ever read. I cannot recommend it highly enough to anyone working on becoming a better musician. Anders Ericsson was a highly influential Swedish psychologist known especially for his research in the psychological nature of expertise and human performance. His research served as the basis for the 10,000 hour rule. But as you'll find out in this book, it was never intended to be a rule. It sounds obvious, but it is not merely a matter of the amount of time you put in, but what you do with the time. In this book, Anders describes the difference between what he calls traditional practice, purposeful practice, and deliberate practice. And the research is clear. Deliberate practice is key to achieving extraordinary results. Now, some of you might be rolling your eyes thinking, gosh, Joe, we know this. We know you've got to practice. But it is very interesting to think about the difference between what Anders categorizes as purposeful practice and deliberate practice. Purposeful practice is what most people do, those serious about their craft, that is. It is practicing with a goal, which is good, but deliberate practice is next level practice. And it is the method that the most extraordinary performers employ. It is informed purposeful practice. It involves what I describe as feedback in my flare-focused feedback idea. Check my Talent is BS video for that. Anders advocates for the use of a coach, similar to the way I advocate for musical mentors. And the way Anders and Robert write about the relationship between developing our mental models and developing our skill is just fascinating. All that being said, this book is really worth reading if you are a practicing musician. Purchase it from your local bookstore or from Amazon using my affiliate link below. The second book I would highly recommend musicians read is Mindset by Dweck. In fact, I think this is a book that just about everybody should read and every parent should read. This book is 280 pages of one idea, and the idea is that we can either operate from a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. This is a huge topic, and I think it is one of the most important ideas that we need to think about in this era of social media. My video, Talent is BS, which I have received countless messages about, is basically about mindset. Many people think of talent as being the natural endowments of a person, as is one definition in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. This is what Professor Dweck describes as the fixed mindset, and she articulates beautifully in this book that it is not a good way to think, but we all do it to some degree. If you praise a child using phrases like, you are so gifted, or you are such a natural, they are going to be shy about living up to that expectation. And it's the same with our self-talk. If you praise a child using phrases like, wow, can you tell me how you figured out how to do that? Or I'm really impressed with the work you put in to figure out how to do that, you'll do a much better job at fostering their growth. And the same with, your self-talk. Similarly, if you scold a child with phrases like, you're just not a natural at that, or that competitor is just too talented, you're teaching them to operate with a fixed mindset. And if you view the social media world through the lens of the fixed mindset, I think you can become jealous and depressed. And, if you think all these amazing musicians have some immutable traits that you don't have, or if you think these beautiful models have immutable traits that you don't have, or if you think these rich, successful people have immutable traits that you don't have, then you're not really seeing the world in a clear way. These musicians practice like mad or obsessively tinker to be able to play like they do. These rich people have figured out a way to provide tremendous value. These models have beautiful facial structure in part because they have practiced good tongue posture for years, whether they know it or not. They have low body fat because of diet. They have curves because of hormones, and yes, genetics does certainly play a role, but the more we learn about epigenetics and how our lifestyle can change our gene expression, the more we realize, how much environmental factors have to do with it. I highly recommend reading about Weston A. Price and his book Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, and also Deep Nutrition by Kate Shanahan. Of course, we can't change physics, we can't go back in time, we can't deny reality, we can't fool ourselves, but none of us have even the slightest idea of our potential, and we all self-limit our abilities to learn and achieve. I certainly don't want to butcher Professor Dweck's ideas and tangle them in my own, so I highly recommend you read this book for yourself, and I feel this is a book that you don't necessarily have to read all 280 pages of to get the point and to get value. I think this can be a book that you read 50 pages of and then file away until you need a bit of a reality check or a refresher. The third book I would highly recommend to musicians is Effortless Mastery by Werner. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this book, but it is just a beautiful read. I think any musician will relate to Kenny's story and his ideas about playing music. I think his discussions on how fear and ego can influence the teaching, playing, composing, and enjoyment of music will resonate with just about every musician. Kenny describes effortless playing in 4 steps. Step 1 is being able to play a note on one's instrument while relaxed and calm. Step 2 is to play a free improvisation while in that state. Step 3 is discovering what one can play while in this state. And step 4 is to master playing music effortlessly, hence the book's name. It is a book that will be well received by improvising musicians and those with a more spiritual relationship to music. I loved it and I highly recommend it. So those are the 3 books that I would recommend to any musicians. And here is the full list of books I completed during 2021. I typically read physical books for 30 to 45 minutes most days. I listen to audio books when I'm traveling. And if I'm really into a book, I might read it for up to 2 to 3 hours on the occasional day. But those days are rare, and usually it's when I can't wait to finish a great book, especially a fiction book. I'd love to read more fiction, actually. I feel like I've been saying this for years, but I'm just a genuinely curious person, and I feel like there's just so much to read and learn. So here's the list. The first 12 are the ones that I felt were particularly outstanding. Peak by Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. Mindset by Carol Dweck. Effortless Mastery by Werner. On Writing by Stephen King. This is a great book. Deep Work by Cal Newport. I love all of Cal's books. This one and the next one is really great as well. So good they can't ignore you. This is about, not necessarily chasing your passion, but trying to be so good at something that you just provide tremendous value to people. It's about trying to provide value rather than seek it. And a lot of people who are just trying to follow their passion, it's like you're asking the world to give you something as opposed to being a craftsman and creating something that's so valuable and so special that you provide a lot of value to people, and there's a lot of meaning in that. I read The One Thing by Gary Keller, which I read as an audiobook. It's a book that I keep returning to, once a year at least. It's a fantastic book about focusing. It's kind of based around the Pareto principle, and I think it's just well articulated in that book. The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. Nassim is one of my favorite authors. I've read all of his books, except the new, more technical book, but all of the books in the Inserto series. And this is probably my favorite, The Black Swan. I also really like Anti-Fragile and Fooled by Randomness. Nassim says the best books cannot be summarized, and I think that is the case with The Black Swan. It was a big hit book when it came out, and it's still, I think, relevant and fascinating. He's one of the more interesting people I've read in recent years, for sure. 1,000 Years of Joy and Sorrow by Ai Weiwei. This is a fascinating memoir. Ai Weiwei is a famous Chinese artist, and his father was a very famous Chinese poet. And they were sent into exile, during the time when the CCP was controlling what the intellectual class were allowed to express through art and whatnot. And it is really, really a fascinating read. I'm actually midway through this book. I'm filming this a couple days before the new year. Caesar and Christ by Will and Ariel Durant. This is the 3rd book in their Story of Civilization series, and it is quite a long read, but it is really, really fascinating. These books were written over a period of decades. It's a 12-book series, and I'm really, really enjoying going through them. I know people like Elon Musk think that this is one of the best series of books that we can read to understand, our history and our current predicaments. Seeking Wisdom by Peter Bevelin. This is a great book that focuses on the cognitive biases, puts into an evolutionary framework some of the ideas of Charlie Munger. All the Light We Cannot See. This is a beautiful fiction book about a blind girl in World War II. I didn't want it to end. It's just absolutely beautiful read. I read Countdown by Shanna Swan. This is about fertility and how the fertility rate is decreasing by 1% per year and has been for the past 50 years. So obviously that's quite concerning and important to be aware of. I read Bounce, which fits in the category of books with peak, talent is BS, and those kind of books that study expert performance. It's written by Matthew Syed, and he is like a ping pong champion in England, I believe. I read Purple Cow by Seth Godin, which is a marketing book. I read Building a StoryBrand by Donald Miller, which is also a marketing book. I read Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. This is a book about, how to not become too addicted to social media and the value of switching it off occasionally. This is a great book. All of Cal's books, I think, are fantastic. I read Crush It by Gary Vaynerchuck. This is a book about leveraging social media to build your business. It's funny to juxtapose this book with Digital Minimalism. Gary is certainly a pioneer of social media, and it is an amazing time to be a content creator. So I read Crush It. I've read this several times. I also read Crushing It, which is the follow-up book with stories of people who took Gary's ideas and had a lot of success with them. I read The Tao of Charlie Munger by David Clark as an audiobook. I read Pizza Tiger by Tom Monaghan, who's the fellow who created Domino's Pizza. Interesting story. I read Atomic Habits by James Clear as an audiobook. There's Crushing It by Gary Vaynerchuck that I just mentioned. I read TED Talks by Chris Anderson as an audiobook. This is a book about public speaking. I read The 7 Principles of Public Speaking by Richard Zeoli as an audiobook. I read Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. This is a great book. It's fascinating to learn about David's story. He certainly had a tumultuous childhood, to say the least. I actually had the pleasure of meeting him one time at the local YMCA here in Nashville. I was at that gym one time. It was a few years ago now, pre-COVID, and he was in there working out, and I was in there too. And I went and said hello to him, and he was a lovely chap, and certainly an amazing athlete, an inspiring person. I read How to Influence People by John Maxwell as an audiobook. I read The Psychology of Performance by Eddie O'Connor, which is an audiobook as well, part of the Great Courses series. I read Beyond Order by Jordan Peterson. I read Conquering Life's Stage Fright by Mark Schulman. Here it is. Mark Schulman is a great drummer. He plays for Pink and Foreigner and a lot of different folks. And he's a friend of mine. He gave me this book at the NAMM show a couple years ago. And it's really, really great book about stage fright, not only, on the stage, but in life in general. And, I get asked by a lot of people, how do you deal with nerves when you're on stage and stage fright and that kind of thing. And this is a great book with a lot of practical suggestions. So, Conquering Life's Stage Fright by Mark Schulman. EntreLeadership by Dave Ramsey as an audiobook. This is a great book. I've read it pretty much, once a year for the past 5 years or so. I'm really fascinated with the way Dave has built an amazing business. I think he has over 1,000 employees here now in Nashville. I definitely believe in his debt-free philosophy, especially for musicians, creative people. It just gives you so much freedom to not have any debt and to be disciplined about how much money you spend, how much money you save, how much money you earn, that kind of thing. So, EntreLeadership by Dave Ramsey. I read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir as an audiobook, and I really enjoyed that book. I read it during a drive from Nashville to Quebec. It's about an 18-hour drive total, and the book is about that length. So I remember pulling into Quebec, when I just finished it. And it was a fun way to spend the drive. I read Indistractable by Nir Eyal as an audiobook. I read Neurofitness by Raoul Jandile as an audiobook. I read The Martian by Andy Weir as an audiobook, which I have to say I didn't enjoy it quite as much as Project Hail Mary. And I know The Martian is the famous one, but it was still, fun to read. I read Bed of Procrustes by Nassim Taleb. This is one of my favorite books. It's a really short book. I read it as an audiobook actually, and it's just full of aphorisms, and every aphorism you could sit there and think about for a good long amount of time. It's quite a funny book. I like his sense of humor. Invent and Wander by Jeff Bezos. This is not really a book written by Jeff Bezos. It's just a collection of his writings and letters to shareholders and to his team and whatnot. It is interesting, but I would prefer to read a book that was written by Jeff. I think that would obviously be pretty interesting. I read Beyond Religion by the Dalai Lama as an audiobook. I read Deep Nutrition by Kate Shanahan, and I enjoyed every page of this book. This is a wonderful book on nutrition and health, and how traditional diets throughout the world can have a lot of variety, but when we start to take away those traditional ways of eating, it can be really catastrophic on the people. So it's kind of in the vein of Western A. Price. This is a great book, I think. I read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, which I've read a couple times now. I read Superfans by Pat Flynn, which is an audiobook about marketing. I read YouTube Secrets by Campbell and Travis as an audiobook. I read this book, which we're not going to get into for obvious reasons. I read A Revolution in Singing by Gary Katona as an ebook. Gary Katona is a voice coach, and this is a book about his ideas about vocal technique. Really goes against the grain of a lot of voice coaches. I find him to be a really interesting and charismatic fellow. He was the voice coach for people like Whitney Houston and Stevie Wonder, and I use his voice app. It's called Voice Builder. And the last one is Marketing Made Simple by Donald Miller as an audiobook. I say it's the last one, but I actually read another 12 or 15 books, but I didn't finish them. So I hope you enjoyed this video. All the best to you, and thank you for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Do take good care out there, and Happy New Year.